important person. Okay, so now we are live and we are recorded. Welcome everybody, and we'll see you on at in 7 minutes. And to everybody here, can you all give a cheers so that the people online know that we have some people here? Okay, so if you go make a cup of tea and we just wait for, because as I say every time we do this, the people who are online always come on time, but the people who are coming in person always come late. It's amazing. So like, yes. Okay. Rosalind, can you mute yourself, please? Or we'll mute you.
Mute or be muted.
Exactly. Okay, so yeah, exactly. Yes. Exactly. Yeah.
But I'm going to be looking over here.
Yeah, when we start.
Okay.
When we start for the introduction. So for those of you who we can sort of vaguely chat, this is the book. Oh, this is the magic background, so it doesn't show.
Not this one. No,
No.
nothing.
Okay. No.
Okay. Oh dear.
Yeah, so okay, so they put my face. No?
No, it's in the background.
Listen. Yeah, but they put the magic background thing. So it's only my face that shows. So if so I know the book is in the background, but I wanted to show the book too to them online. But because of the magic background.
Yeah, let's see. So they can see the one.
Yes, I know, but I wanted them to know it's here, it's real. It's not a picture.
If I kind of block it out with my hands, does it help? Sometimes, yeah.
Hey, okay, there we go. Okay, a magic.
Almost had it, yeah.
Yes, there we go. So there you are. See, it's a real book because I feel it's important to say because it's not from the title. Imagine Lagos. No, it is a real book.
It's actually here.
It's actually here.
Yeah, not your imagination.
It's not in your imagination. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's hard to run a hybrid session.
Okay. We've been doing it.
No, I know it's just hard because you have to manage everything in person and online. Yeah, good. My block consumption. I mean, you know, that's sure. Yes. So also, one of the things I wanted to say is that I kind of front loaded a lot of stuff at the beginning, and then I have a lot of slides, so I'll just go back if anybody wants to see anything in particular, because I have a lot of visual stuff. And so, okay, happy to go back with like that.
Okay. So we have
a few minutes. It's okay.
Yeah, we have 3 more minutes. So what will happen is that at we will start, and then at 5:10, and then at 5:15, all the latecomers will now start coming in physically and will now be upset that we didn't wait for them. So if in Lagos, the same piece of fire. It's only fire. So they also going to start a fire. No, but regulars, I'm surprised. Usually, no, that's why you're here on time. We start from, I just allow that 5 to 5:10. We start by 5 to 7. We're out of here. So if you stroll in at 7:30 to catch the end of it, you'll be helping them to put away the chairs.
Yeah.
I agree. I take that. But we do have um regulars, so I'm surprised that they
My brother-in-law is coming too, so he probably is wondering, maybe he'll show up in a few minutes.
Mhm.
Should I take the iPhone? I'm just very dreaming. Yeah. And then we walked in the sun this morning. It was a lot. But good. Was good. Like a disconnect from Zoom. Oh, no.
So 2 more minutes to everybody online. Hope you're thank you for joining early and for being in fact that's it. Like thank you for joining on time. And just give us a few minutes and we shall start at 10 past 5.
You always start at 10 past.
10
You don't wait till 15. Well, we can't wait forever, I guess.
You can't wait forever and it's not fair. And the people, okay, so we can ask the people online. Okay, clap. Clap way. Welcome. Yeah, yeah. Hi, Simon. Welcome. Okay, so we are just to fill you in. We have the people online, okay, who are all here online and waiting. And so we are managing the people online with the people who are here. So every time more people in here come, we cheer.
It's full. I think everyone's chill.
Yeah. Okay. So
I mean, I don't mind waiting a little.
okay, let's ask. Um, um okay. People online, can you indulge us with about 5 more minutes or should we go ahead? Can you type your answers?
If I walk away, will you clap for me when I come back?
Yes. Okay. Can you all hear me? Should we indulge the Lagos latecomers or shall we begin? Okay, five more, 5 more. Okay, so people here, a round of applause for the people online. Hey! Okay, so we have about 20 people registered online. We don't have 20 people here yet, but we wait 5 more minutes and 5:15 we will start. Thank you so much. You can now have biscuits with your tea. Oh, this is nice. So, kind message from Kristen Mann who says the Lagos folks have more to contend with. It is easier for we who are zooming to join than for them to fight the traffic. So Ademide doesn't believe me because you heard her being sarcastic that if she goes out, we'll reach out for her when she comes in. So I'm counting on you that when she comes in, we will indeed clap for her. Okay, and people online, feel free, feel free to join in too.
Totally spontaneous.
That's on you. Take everything seriously here. So you take everything seriously here. Okay, so 2 more minutes, and we have some more people who have arrived. So welcome. Thank you, Dr.
When's the next one? The next event. Um, Next quarter. She's great. I'm sure to join us soon.
Okay,
On time.
please. Yeah.
And we'll be patient.
Yes. Although in the meantime, what I'm going to do for Women's History Month is I'm going to put on my LinkedIn and on my Twitter the recordings of past women authors we've done. So if you haven't watched Professor Abosede George, if you haven't watched talk about Romana returning from Brazil, if you haven't watched Dr. Oh, already online. Okay, that was me. Okay. If you haven't listened, how do we mute everyone? Please mute yourself.
It's Alex.
Okay, he's off.
Oh, good. Thank you.
If you haven't listened to Dr. Kathy Oke talking about goldsmiths in Lagos, round of applause. That was a good one, wasn't it? Yes. Says about Romana, and if you haven't listened to the late and much missed Tayo Agumbiade's work on, yes, I will post all of those up on my LinkedIn and my Twitter for as a way of celebrating Women's History Month. So it's 5:15. Here we are, and off we start. I'd like to welcome you all here. A round of applause for you. I'd like to welcome even more those of you online who have been so patient around me. And first of all, I'd like to take this up. I'd like to say how delighted I and Loving Lagos are to have with us today Dr. Ademide Adelusi-Adeluyi, who fantastic. He is a student of African history, particularly Lagos history, and now teaches it. She teaches it at Howard. And so, we don't bring you little people here. We don't bring you little people here. We have here a Howard professor. Give yourselves a round of applause. We are in Howard as we speak. Yeah, right. Listen. Yeah. Minus reason, because after all, people go to Howard to listen to her, yeah? And we are here. Listen, Howard has, so please, a round of applause. Ademide is one of our own. Grew up in Lagos. My claim to fame with her is her father and I were in law school together at the same time. So yeah, I'm delighted to have her. Her new book, Imagine Lagos, is a book that, like from the little blurb you can see, I'm going to read, mapping history, place, and politics in a 19th century African city. And when she says mapping, she means mapping. She doesn't mean mapping in, oh, I'm going to put things here. She means a map. So her methodology is fascinating. I met Ademide at the Lagos Studies Association in 2018. I attended her talk, and I was blown away by the genius, and I'm not using that word lightly, in the thought process of taking modern day GIS and mapping technology and placing it on top of 18th century maps and using that as a way to let the differences in what you are seeing talk about the history. But this isn't my show. I'm going to hand over to Ademide now, and she's going to tell us more about that methodology. She has a presentation. I will interject at times, but if I feel that we are all flowing, I will leave her and we will have questions. I have my notes that you see. So, because I too, I should go to Howard too. What do you think? Yes. So, yes, exactly. So, Demide, over to you.
All right, I'm gonna set my timer first so that I don't speak more than I read. You said 30 minutes.
30 minutes? Yes.
Oh, awesome.
Although we may want her to speak for more, but let's see how this goes.
Yes. All right. Well, okay. First of all, thank you, everyone. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming online and in person. I mean, you can't imagine how happy I am to be able to present my work in Lagos, my work on Lagos in Lagos. So,
oh, I clap moments.
So, I mean, for me, this is really important because this is why I did this work. And well, first, I'll say thank you to my hosts. Thank you to Loving Lagos and Awon for having me here. You know, this has been a place I've attended talks and everything. So for me, because my book is freshly out, it's such an honor and an opportunity to be here. So thank you for inviting me. And of course, to Big Sis Aduke, who, you know, has been an important part of Lagos studies. You know, I believe you did win a distinguished award at Lagos Studies.
Yes,
and you were a
I
speaker.
Yes.
So, you know,
and I'm on the board now.
Exactly. So you've seen this project evolve over time and then through the pandemic as well, which made some serious changes. So thank you for being here and being part of this conversation. And of course, thank you to those online and in person for coming. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share my slides and start. But one of the reasons why this is important for me to do this in Lagos is because, as Aduke said, as somebody who grew up in Lagos, I went to secondary school, with primary, secondary, and a little bit of university here. And I didn't learn any history about Lagos. You know, being Yoruba, you know, there's the culture, there's the food, there's things you enjoy, there's the partying. But, you know, I remember when I moved to America, people would ask me about where I was from. And I had really, you know, beyond the sort of fun stuff, I really had no idea. I'd been tracked to STEM very early. You know, you're a woman, you show any aptitude in math, you're just sort of like, boom, STEM. So, you know, but I think that doesn't mean that we can't do history as well. So for me, discovering Lagos is really something that happened after I left, discovering the history and how important it was. And I really wanted to do this book for people like myself, my friends, you know, my nieces, my nephews, so that, you know, we should know, I think we should know something about where we're from. I think
Absolutely.
it's important. I just happen to do it in the sort of academic sense, becoming an academic historian, after, like going back to school and doing other things. But so for me, this is really a labor of doing this here for people in Lagos and making it accessible. Lagos studies is important. So this is why institutions like Loving Lagos, I think, are really important so we can have these conversations about the history of Lagos. So I will share my screen and I will begin. Share screen. Oh, okay. Send request for sharing.
Okay. And Ademide is being shy. She trained as an engineer and an architect. When she's talking about STEM, it's so she's not just being, oh, I just did some physics and chemistry. She's a real proper STEM. So
yes, but you know, I also so thank you. But I also believe that part of the problem with STEM is that, you know, people always build things, but they never really know why they're building them, right? You know, and we see the problem of the world today. Many things. So yeah. All right, you can see the screen. So one of the things about my work, when I say Imagine Lagos, as Aduke said, I mean it literally. I want people to be able to imagine what Lagos was like. Starting in my book starts 180 years ago. So it talks about Lagos between 1845 and 1872. I say this because I have a lot of slides, I have a lot of visual evidence, things that I will skip past. So if anything piques your interest, if there's anything you want to see in particular, I'd be willing to go back to it because you'll see here that I not only make maps, I use historical maps, and there's so many of them that are incredible, just like the one that is on the cover of the. So without further ado, so in thinking about the title for today, I was like, so the book is called Imagine Loving Lagos. I mean, this is Loving Lagos and the book is called Imagine Lagos. But I was like, is it a question or is it a statement? Can you imagine loving Lagos? Or do we just really, you know, we really do love this place, but I feel like, so I couldn't pick, is it a question or a statement? So I wanted to start with that. But for me, as somebody who came to history much later, after my undergraduate degree, one of the things I found out in reading about Lagos that is very blank, right? When you read these history books about Lagos, nobody really understands where anything is happening before the 20th century. You read about Tokyo, Paris, London, I love cities. And, I can almost visualize these places, but you cannot, it's really hard to visualize Lagos. So for me, a lot of what I wanted to do was really bring the city to life. And I'll talk about this in a second, but I like to use this quote from 1882, and I like to read this. If you ever see me do anything anywhere, I always read this quote. This is from the Lagos Observer in 1882. And the editor writes in response to someone, "We have your letter, but it's crowded out of this issue. You forget that Lagos has what England has not, a climate composed of equal parts of sunshine, mosquitoes, sand, high temperature, sweetness, light, sound, fury, rain, rage, retribution, and that sort of thing." This quote is over 100 years old. So this energy, this feeling we have in the city that we love and we hate or we want to get away from is a historical feeling. And I think this is part of what I want to talk about in my work. But one of the things that we do see in thinking about Lagos is that we do have a lot of certain kinds of narratives, certain kinds of stories. There are important stories of obas, princes, lineage, those kinds of things. Those things I think we know a little bit about, and people are very invested. We also have a lot of narratives around people who are very wealthy and who built really important houses or structures, or people who are merchants. So I think that kind of stuff is stuff we're familiar with. But what I really want to think about is, if Lagos had 50,000 people at a certain point, who are these people in the crowd? What were their lives like? How did they live? How did they die? What traits did they leave in the city? So that's what I'm interested in. And if you look at these two images on the left, they're something like 100 years apart. So we're still seeing that Lagos is this place of opportunity. And what I think about, one of the questions I ask is, how can we narrate the histories of more people? People who ordinarily were not in the archive, people you may not have ever heard about. And so how can we think about a history of Lagos that reflects the experiences of more of the population? So this is what I think about in my work. And in doing research on Lagos, I used to work in a firm where we were doing research on post-oil boom Lagos, but I realized that that kind of dark version of Lagos also is one that's sort of devoid of context. We need context. And I started thinking further and further back. And my research led me to the 19th century. And I'll show you that in my work, I say that the 19th century really laid the foundation for the Lagos that we're aiming today, specifically the 1851 bombardments. So part of what I argue in my work is that Lagos is a wounded city, right? And these scars are visible everywhere in the city. And the scars that we have in Lagos are they're from war, they're from violence, they're from bombardments, they're from slavery, and they're also from political competition. But also these scars come from this sort of monotony of progress that came around through colonialism. One of the things that's really important for thinking about Lagos for me is that the British intervened in the struggle between Akitoye and Kosoko in 1851, and they bombarded the city twice. And in destroying the sort of western edge of Lagos and part of the ammunition around the palace, they generated so many sources about Lagos. And it's actually ironically, because we don't have a lot of written sources from the perspectives of local people, it's only from these records of destruction that we're really able to think about what Lagos really was like in 1851. So of course, Yoruba culture is beautiful, it's wonderful, it's sophisticated, but because it's oral, it didn't really always survive the disruption of colonialism. So what we have is that we need to find different kinds of sources if we want to talk about the 1840s, the 1850s, the 1860s, because I think that is an important period. So ironically, what happens is that a historian like me, I will read the records of the bombardment, and I try to rebuild Lagos by thinking about they talk about everything they destroyed. And that's part of how I know what we can see. There's a kind of rebuilding process for Lagos. So you can even see here in this quote from one of the letters here, they talk about how the water was cleared of canoes, they burnt the town and all of these things. But I'll come back to that. So for me, ironically, the destruction of Lagos in 1851 is critical for us because it is this process of rebuilding the city that we see here. The sort of pattern we see in Lagos Island today comes from bombardment at Lagos when they destroyed the city to help Akitoye come to power. I think it's actually something. Thank you. Okay, cool. Awesome. So, and even though the bombardment is not something that's really well studied today, there are incredible maps that were made from the ships like, the Bloodhounds, all the ships that the British used to bombard the city twice actually in 1851. They were unsuccessful in November and they came back in December with a vengeance. And they even write it in their own sources. They had a lucky shot, and this is what helped them win. And I show these three maps because these are among my most favorite maps of Lagos. And these were made by the men on the ships, people like on the Teaser, on the Jackal, on the Bloodhound. And I like to say that, we don't even see how our own history is embedded. That starts in like the 16th century, 17th century, all sorts of things, right? I mean, even the All right. Okay. All right. Back.
Okay, round of applause for the technology. Okay, I'm recording. Okay, we are recording.
So, okay, to answer the question, we have evidence of all kinds of things. So even why we call this place Lagos, right? And then, if you are reading sources from Brazil, they call it Onim, right? So yes, definitely there is evidence about this encampment that may have been used by soldiers from Benin, but it's a little bit outside my period, the earlier parts. But it's definitely, I think, we need to do a lot more work on the earlier periods. So for me, the 19th century is kind of my starting point. I'm going to start looking really further back. But there's a lot of work, and I'll talk about this today. Etymology is really important. Is it Oko? Is it Eko? Is it Onim? Is it Lagos? And even you'll see, so to continue what I'm saying here, you'll find that maps contain this information for us. Even some maps I'll show you, they'll say Eko or Lagos often Eko, so that this information and this debate, it does echo through the maps. So just what I wanted to say here is that, now start my timer again, is that maps are a really important source of historical information. So it's one thing to look at documents, letters, all of that kind of stuff. But in the end, I found by a happy accident, actually, as I write in the book, that maps are a really important source of information, and they corroborate and also conflict with oral narratives and oral traditions. So I'll talk about that a little bit later. So that I wanted to just highlight two things that are important. So this idea of using maps, and I'll come back to that in a second. So, but then the second thing I wanted to think about was, as an academically trained historian, what they encourage us to do is you need documents, as I said before. So for me, it was always very ironic to start doing Lagos history in London, right? So, anyone who sort of wants to do Lagos history 20th, especially the further back you go, you have to sort of start at Kew Gardens, where the National Archives are. And it's really well organized. They have a ton of stuff. And most of the stuff from the 19th century is already open because it's no longer sort of controversial. But I always felt uncomfortable doing Lagos history and going to London. Like, people were like, what are you doing here? Like, I'm studying Lagos. But that's how I was trained, because we need documents. And that always kind of made me feel like I needed to do better, right? I mean, there's archives here, and there's archives in the museum right here in Onikan, and there's archives in Ibadan. But even when you go, a lot of the stuff is 20th century. We're very sort of in that century. And I think we really need to start pushing back. And as you mentioned, even further back than I've done, right? I did a
Are we good?
This is why I have a lot of images, folks. So, are we good? Yes. Yes. So, one of the things that I wanted to do, so in doing this history of the tram, I decided with some of my research partners that I was actually going to walk the route of the tram. The tram, went all the way down the marina, and then it went into the interior of Lagos in the early 20th century. But even though they pulled out the tracks, I remember when I told you I was doing this walking, exactly, everybody was very concerned. Like, I don't think you should do this. This is a bad idea. But I was like, actually, no. I have this feeling that, I will look for the tracks with my partners. I will see what we can find. And actually, we found 2 or 3 pieces of evidence, and people were really helpful. And so then I started thinking, I wonder what else there is in Lagos Island. Like, what can we find in Lagos? And that led to a really important discovery, because we were walking in Ekpetedo, and I said this yesterday, and I was corrected. So please correct my pronunciation. It's okay. So I was walking in Ekpetedo with my research partners, and one of the things we got to this street. You see, street signs are really important for me. And I was like, is this Inobere, as in the fire started? And if you know anything about Lagos in the 19th century, you'll know that there are so many fires in the city. And one of the things historians say is that there's no evidence, there's no evidence. So imagine stumbling on this street name in the middle of it, and on the edges of Ekpetedo. And I was like, okay, interesting. And you see the layers, like there's a newer sign and there's an older sign on the back. We walked a little further, and what did we see? Omididun Street. And I was like, what is happening here? Like, why do we have these street names? You know, when you think of street names in Lagos, it's Marina, it's Broad Street, maybe on some of the ones on the edges. And so we were at the intersection of Inobere and Omididun thinking, what is happening here and how do we understand what I'm seeing? And if you ask people there,
And maybe we can say what these mean.
oh, of
People
course,
understand.
my apologies. So in my mind, Inobere means like the fire started here. The fire started. And Omididun, if you ask people who live on the street, they'll tell you that it's about Ogi and Pap, you know. But one of the things that is not obvious that there used to be a lagoon right there. And I wonder what the quality of the water was and why maybe this name is about the water. And then we walked a
Because
little
Omiduru means
I'm sorry, very sweet, tasty water, which is why people might think it's Ogi. And then we walked a little further, and what did we find? Inosa, which means thank you, which could mean the fire ended. So I'm walking in Lagos Island, encountering these mysteries. I'm like, is this a story about a fire starting and ending? Of course, I'll tell you later that Inosa could be a family name, but then we don't know the real origin. So then my research partners and I were thinking, this is very peculiar, and what is happening here? So then I went back and I did some research. And what I found, and I've already been making these maps and looking. So Otumba Payne, who's a really famous 19th century Lagosian, he was a registrar, he was a sort of lawyer also, and he had these almanacs. One of the things he says in his almanacs, and I'll zoom in, is that in 1868, in February, about 160 years today, he named all the streets of Lagos. And so he made this claim that he did do this. And he did it. He did it himself. He went around and you see, this is a page from his almanac. And if you ever read his almanacs, it's just full of incredible information. So then I realized that we actually have an archive sitting right here in the city. And if we zoom in and we look at all the names, they all mean something important. They're names of men, they're names of women, they're names of people who've come back to Lagos, people who left Lagos, people who remembered Lagos, people who wanted to be home here. There's names of African Americans like Joseph Harden, there's names of Jamaicans, there's names of women. So there are more streets than this than he named, but it's something like 88 to 100 names, and many of them are actually still in use. The only names that changed were things like there used to be Victoria Road, which actually was sort of Itaoni Baba, where they talk about, they used to throw out little children there. There's so much of our information and our history is actually embedded. And part of what I do in my work is I realized that I had to catalog this, I had to map it, and I had to interpret it. So in the book, you see some of these images, and on the right, I put all the streets as they are in the different historical quarters of Lagos. And then I draw these. And then, of course, remember that image I showed you? If I zoom in, we can see Balogun Square. So when you start to look for things, you start to find them everywhere. So I've collected the names of all the historical streets that he named. And then I start to look for them. There's Riwa Street, there's Broad Street here. If we zoom in, we can see all of these things. So what I argue in the book is, so look at Custom Street from about 1920. What I argue in the book is that he left us something to interpret. It was very deliberate. Most of them are in Yoruba. The ones that are in English are those who are Saro, who come back to the city. Those that are in Portuguese are those that were probably, or Spanish, for those who were formerly enslaved Cubans, or Brazilians, I'm sorry. They came back to the city. And what I argue in the book is that we have to interpret this. We have to understand, why did he pick these places? It was deliberate. And for me, I started in England, but I sort of ended in Lagos. And this network of streets, I think, is really critical for understanding, because we were left this legacy. So even though we can't see it, or even though we don't notice it, it's right there all over. And I like to sort of walk people through, like Agaru Street, right there. I'm walking in the city. So I developed this method with my research partners where we continued walking and we started planning these routes. If we had questions about gender and space, we would walk, like we would start in Tinubu Square. If we had questions about slavery and other things, we would start in Breadfruit Street and walk from there and make these itineraries through the city. This is a surprise for you.
Okay, but you have to explain why, because they don't know.
Well, you should explain.
Okay, so it's a surprise for me because Shetolu is the name of my ancestor that came back from Brazil. And if you've been attending our talks, you would have heard me talk about him. So he came back, but he had been kidnapped in the 1820s as Shetolu. He was kidnapped from Owu. He went to But here he was there for over 20 years. And when he came back, he was now Francisco Gomez, but he still hung on to Ishetolu. Yes. So
she
thank
told
you for
me
that.
she told me in December that there was a street named after her family. So of course I went searching to see if I could find that. And unfortunately, the older one has been peeled off. You can almost see that line. Remember, it used to be on the wall. Exactly, but this is one that's left. So I'm always searching and constantly looking, and you'll see from the ways that they look different. You can almost see the histories and layers of these street names all over Takpa Street, everywhere in Lagos. We have this history. And so I can kind of show you, like, I mean, I love collecting them with my photographer. You can see Campbell Street for Robert Campbell. And I love looking who is the Jamaican returnee who started the first newspaper in Lagos. So I think it's really important for us to know that we can start our histories here. We just have to understand what we're looking at. So one of the things that I do is I try to understand what it means. So for instance, in one case, I mapped all the names of Orisha that are mentioned in Lagos street names. And you'll see that they're often where the old lagoons are, or where all the old intersections where the shrines used to be. You see particular patterns, they tend to cluster around water. I also made another map trying to think about, is there a difference in the ways that returnees from Sierra Leone versus, the Caribbean or like Brazil and Cuba, like what does it mean to have these names, even when they century. All right, we're back.
We're back.
Can you see me? Okay, awesome. We're back.
Okay.
There's no worries.
Finish the question and then continue.
So the question was about photography. So for Lagos, we start getting a lot more visual evidence in the later period, starting especially around the 1870s and the 1880s. So for me, we don't really have that many photographs. We actually have far more maps. So the bulk of my visual evidence, the maps start something like the 16th century. We have all of these maps already. The visual evidence starts to accumulate in the 1880s and 1890s. And it's incredible. So much of it has been digitized. And some of it, I'm digitizing. So for instance, there was a French photographer, Edmond Fortier, who rode the tram in, like 1910. And he rode the tram not just on the marina, but all over in the interior. And one of his photographs is there of those little streets. And the first column, the middle image, and so he rode the tram, and it seems like he got off the tram. And so once you get past the 1880s, the evidence is incredible. And part of what I'm doing with my website is trying to make this visual. In fact, somebody sent me some images yesterday, because every time anyone stumbles on a street sign, they send it to me. So there's a lot of stuff that's available, and I'm really trying to work hard to make this visual. And the other question I would get is, is there going to be a sort of multimedia version of this? I'm trying. So I'd be happy to work with anybody who can make this kind of thing possible. But just to end thinking about the street names, I picked about 30 or 32 street names that I think are really important. And these form the kind of crux of trying to understand Lagos Island, especially in my time period anyway. And you see in the book that my method included walking all the time. Eventually, my parents got over the fact that I was walking Lagos Island constantly. And, now they're happy that I did it in that way, even though a lot of people were really apprehensive. But I will say that my experiences, of course, I walk with two men, because of, there are some issues. But my experience is more like people were so warm, they were welcoming, they wanted to debate the meaning of the street names with me and like correct my pronunciation and things like that. And so for me, I've identified about 30. And you see in the book that every chapter starts at a different intersection in Lagos Island. And because this is an important part of my methodology, I work with a friend of mine, Falani Brown, who owns a cultural center called Bada around the corner from here. And we take people on these historical walks of Lagos. So not just the marina, but we're trying to get into the more inside Lagos, not a kind of poverty tour thing, but we're thinking, we were in Breadfruit Street this morning. We were in Tinubu Square. We're at CMS. We're at all of these places this morning. So if I'm a little sweaty and a little stressed out, this is what I've been doing all day today. So I think that, as I said in the beginning, bringing along people like myself who weren't exposed to these kinds of things growing up, bringing along my friends, people who are interested, and I make new friends with this process. So, when I'm back in June, we're also thinking about doing this. I took this picture this morning looking at Madame Tinubu's face, and when we were there in front of her statue, we were debating her legacy, right? What have we heard about her legacy? What do we understand about slavery in Lagos? I won't play the video because I don't have their permission. But the last walking route we did, we were at Breadfruit Street. Many people don't know that there are real breadfruits in Lagos. And of course, we don't even know the source of these breadfruits. How do they come from the Caribbean?
Breadfruit.
No, but they're not native to Lagos.
No, yes, but what's breadfruit?
Oh, so breadfruit is a I guess is a fruit. It says in Jamaica.
Yes.
And it's very like fleshy. It reminds me of like papaya, like pawpaw.
Yeah.
That's my understanding.
But it can be cooked. It's cooked.
Interesting. I did ask that.
You don't eat breadfruit
That's
raw.
is it the one that's poisonous?
No, that's cassava.
Okay.
But breadfruit is cooked, and it's when cooked, apparently it's like bread.
So one of the things that people don't know is that there are real breadfruit trees right there on Breadfruit Street. This is why it was named Breadfruit Street. And in fact, Samuel Ajayi Crowther, after his town was destroyed in war, and he was enslaved and he was kept in Lagos waiting to be shipped to the over the Atlantic. He actually was allowed to roam in Lagos because they believed the people who captured him thought he couldn't escape. So he actually, when he eventually was free, he writes about what he remembers about Lagos. He writes about being punished, being tied to breadfruit trees, and being whipped, and all of this. So for me, who didn't learn anything about slavery in Lagos, it's just so incredible to know that all of this is in the street. So when we're there, people don't even imagine that. They think it's not even, it's a literal name. It's Breadfruit Street. So this morning when we were at St. Paul's, Breadfruit, the sign is there. It was established in 1852, right after the bombardment. And the missionaries specifically chose to build over places where people had been enslaved, to kind of erase this memory of slavery and build over it in Lagos. Unfortunately, they also built over, our local beliefs, over the Orisha. They would also like to build over shrines. They'd like to build over anything that conflicted with Christian identity, or even like they would sometimes not even think about Islam. So what we find is that there's layers to Lagos, and I will come back to this. And part of what we have to do is really unpack these layers and unpick them.
And I just want to interject here,
Yes,
because sometimes when you talk about slavery in this part of the world, we tend to think that enslavement and it's only Badagry that was a port. We don't think about the fact that people were being enslaved and were sold right from Marina, right from where John Holt actually is now. And there were slaving centers all around there.
And even that, I don't want to say the point that I mentioned.
The point, yes.
There's like the image of people being taken from the surf right there, and this is why they destroyed those places.
Yeah.
And when you read these sources, they specifically wanted to destroy anything that would prevent the British or the missionaries from taking over. So there's really a sense of wiping and starting again. So this is why I said in the beginning that the Lagos we have now is really a product of that bombardment and that struggle between Akitoya and Kosoko in the 1840s and 50s. So, I'm running out of time here, but I wanted to show you some maps and a little bit of the map making that she mentioned. So in the book, I make three kinds of maps, right? So apart from the historical maps that I use, I also create new maps. Aduke was talking about, GIS, Illustrator, things like that, because as you said before, we just don't have that visual evidence for this time period that is so important. So for me, a lot of what I do, well, maybe I'll say this part. Oh, somebody's back unmuted. So for me, as a person who started by looking for documents, and I just give you an example of the kinds of things, if you go to the British Archive, if you go to the British National Archive, you basically dial up something and they bring it to you while you're waiting for your coffee. And while I was there, I noticed that sometimes I would see little maps, sometimes I would see bigger maps, and they were I would see pages ripped in documents. So one day I was waiting for my coffee and I realized that they had a third floor. And I actually started the book with this. And the third floor was the map room. I was like, I wonder what's up there. So I just walked up there and that changed everything I was doing, because what I found out was that all those missing pages, they had basically removed the maps for storage and removed them from the document that they went with. So I spent over 10 years trying to match them back, because they store them by they're rolled or they're flat or there's something. And this is an incredible legacy for those of us who are interested in Lagos. So for instance, this map was drawn by William Lawson. Was drawn for the Colonial and English exhibition. And I'll zoom in and you'll see he maps names, if you're a Fernandez and Ferreira, if you're a King, if you're a Bond, if you're somebody whose family was resident here and had some space, you'll see that these maps, Gomez over here, I'd be curious which Gomez that is. Willoughby, all of these people, these maps contain so much information, and this is why I use them. So this map was on display in London in 1855.
But also, I think it's important to say that
1885, I'm sorry.
Mr. Lawson wasn't English.
No, I'm sorry. So he was also Saro. Thank you so much. He was a Saro returnee with a really interesting family on the coast. And he he's basically, as a map maker in Lagos, he created an incredible legacy for us to witness. Now, this map, which is really interesting, is one of my favorites. This map is at the Royal Geographical Society. And John Glover, who we remember as a governor, was actually also a surveyor. So when he was on the shipwreck of going up the Niger, I believe he was going up, he was shipwrecked on the Dayspring.
Yeah.
And so then he was waiting to be taken back to England. So he came to Lagos and was kind of hanging out. This is like 8 years after the bombardment. And when you hear the old sort of narrative about Lagos, there are 4 or 5 quarters, Ologbo, Ofin, Faji. The few weeks he spent here waiting, he actually went and he mapped each of these places. So this is from 1859. This is the first representation that we see of Iga, Faji, Ologbo, of course spelled incorrectly. And then because of him, we know that the race course has been here since 1859 because this map is from 1859. And all these small things you see up here, this is the depth of the lagoon. So as a Navy man, he actually did the soundings all over the lagoon. It's incredible. But then, because I look for maps everywhere, I realized that there's a version of the map on the left is at the Royal Geographical Society, and on the right is at the National Archives in Kew. And you see it's the same map, but it's a little different. And one of the things he tried to do is sort of tell us the boundaries of places. What is he trying to say about the boundary of Ologbo? Of course, the problem with this map is that he mapped 15 Europeans and no Africans, right? But we see that we can be sure from maps like this, and we know that Faji was kind of the extent, around Tinubu Square was kind of the extent of settlement, and the race course was seen as outside the city. Brazilian towns also outside the city. So I'm going to try to focus so I don't get
yeah. I'm like in a war here with them here. Okay.
So those of us that study maps will tell you that maps are not neutral. Depending on where you find the map, it's trying to say something. And incredibly enough, there's more than what I'm showing you. I have dozens of slides here, but I just wanted to show you that there's so many maps. And in the book, I've put them in sort of 8 categories, where there's some maps are made because of disputes. Somebody's fighting over land, they make a map. So it's incredible. So, they're like, I'm going to prove this is mine. And then they'll make this map. So I'm like, great. I have these, and I call them intimate maps. Some maps about race, about settlement, some maps about itineraries. Somebody went all the way up the Ogun River and he mapped every turn, everything we have. So, but on the other hand, one thing I found, and I'm sort of wrapping up here and I'll come back. One thing I found is that sometimes these historical maps don't resonate with people because there's something very persuasive about a map, right? If you sort of resist questions, someone draws something, you kind of accept it, right? But one of the things I really want to push is that we have to ask questions of these maps. Maps are tools, right? Like sure they can be different. So even something like this map that I find really fascinating is one of the earliest maps of Victoria Island that we have. Look at this, Igoshere Creek, right? Yeah. Right there. Why is it there? Why is there a sort of Igoshere Road as well in Brazilian town? What does this mean? This creek is mostly gone. But when you think about Victoria Island, you might not be thinking about coconut plantations, the mangrove, these salt villages that were there. So this is the kind of information that we have. And this map is from 1898. So imagine the layers of information if we were to look at these and take these things seriously. Think of all the villages like the village of Ikoyi. And in fact, there's multiple villages of Ikoyi. And you see this information is all over. So I spent a lot of time reading these maps and trying to understand. And this is why I think the earlier period is really important. And of course, I like to show people that, this is a subjective process. I'm making decisions here as I'm making these maps. I like to freeze frame in the middle. So you see, I'm erasing things, I'm adding things, I'm coming back together. And so now I'm going to answer the question about where should we dig? One of the things we find is that when you do the 19th century, there are a lot of things that are sandfills in Lagos. Lagos is kind of a sandfill city in that sense. The lagoon, the marina was extended. We had all of these. If you're on Ijumabu Avenue, there used to be a lagoon there. If you're on Elegbata, if you're on the corner of Lake and Elegbata, there used to be a creek. This is like my favorite map of Lagos. And there was a survey done in 1891, a trigonometrical survey, which just means a really detailed survey. And the sheets, there's about 15 sheets. Each one is about this big. And so the incredible amount of detail to me, it's astonishing. And if I zoom in for you, you can see mosques, you can see churches. In fact, this church was built on top of a shrine in this Holy Trinity Church. So that's a whole other conversation. Here, this by the time they made this map, they hadn't built over this fetish shrine. But these are the kinds of things they wanted to erase. The palace is here in this corner. There used to be an arch over here, and but one of the things I realize is that people don't really recognize this map of Lagos, right? People don't really spend a lot of time with this version. In fact, it's looking at this angle. You may not even know it's Lagos
because
I'm
it looks like the wrong way around from how we are used
exactly
to it, right?
in some ways, yeah.
Perhaps you'd like to explain.
So I will definitely get there. Don't worry. So, but one of the things I realized that people recognize this Lagos, right? Whether it's from rideshare, from mapping, things like that. And if you look closely, you can almost see, I don't know if I can trace it, you can almost see the old shape of Lagos. And I'm going to show you how I did this. So one of the things that I do with map making is that you can, as Aduke said earlier, you can overlay depending on the material, depending on the stuff you have. And I have a lot of maps, I can do this, and I've learned how to do this. It's very popular for New York, for London, you know, they have incredible map archives. So the earliest I can do for Lagos is 1891. So the Google map is on top. And I pre-recorded this because sometimes the internet doesn't work, but you know, just here in tons of places, you know. But so with this, you can actually see that I can move the spyglass around and see the missing old parts of Lagos. So if we had to dig, I would say, let's go dig up where Elegbata Creek was, right? Elegbata. And some people, I've been having these arguments, some people think this creek is Eshu Elegbara rather than Elegbata. But you know, we don't have enough information. And I did this for the whole of Lagos Island. So this part is Balogun Square. You can kind of zoom in and see what. So these are pre-recorded, but the live version, imagine if I could do it here, I could have it on the wall. You could move this yourself to sort of see through the city. And I think this is the kind of thing that people find sort of easier to engage with. You can like, okay, I'm from this particular area. And right where we are in Onikan, you can kind of see how the edge was expanded. This is in the logo and off the area. So I just pre-recorded this. And for this, you can see the old, what I call the old shoreline, just around the bombardment. And so I'm able to trace out historical Lagos. You can see the lagoons there, you can see all kinds of information. So if you compare this to the other map I showed you, these traces are still there. Toni Morrison has this quote that water remembers.
Water remembers.
If you look at flooding in Lagos, these are some of the places that are most flood prone in that sense. And so when you're walking there, you'll see, and I remember somebody told me this week that his father told him stories of swimming in Jumabo Lagoon as a child. And he's like, what are you talking about? There is no lagoon. But we do know now because of these maps and this information that there were lagoons there. So I tried to make sure I always write on these maps in Yoruba. So even though they didn't originally represent us, now that we have the ability to do this kind of work, you know, the Salagowa Lagoon, the swamps, all of this, just so that we can have at least a little bit of ownership. And some of these things are available online. So, yes.
I'm going to stop you here because it reminds me of a quote.
Okay.
This is 1871. The streets of Lagos during the rainy season testify to every spectator, white or black, that whatever else he may have known, Mr. John Hunter, the colonial engineer, does not know what is called drainage. So say anything, but if you live in Lagos in the rainy season, I don't think much has really changed. That's 1871.
That's a letter, I think, from the Lagos Weekly Record.
Yeah, that's popular.
Yeah, so maybe a letter from the African Times. You know, so these complaints there, this was kind of historicizing this feeling.
And so the history is still with us, right?
Yes, absolutely. So one of the things, so I should wrap up. I should wrap up and I can answer any questions. But you know, like I said earlier, one of the captains of the ship I talked about, so Captain Jones, for instance, he wrote in one of his letters, when they were bombarding the city, after we tried to destroy Lagos, he wrote in 1851 that, you know, a creek and a swamp running about 200 yards inland had checked the flames and saved the eastern division of the town. And you know, the only creek and swamp I know in the eastern that could have saved the east is right here at Elegbata Street. So at the beginning of the book, in the first chapter, I stand at this corner of Lake and Elegbata. And then I ask people, I was like, do you know why you live on Lake Street? And they're like, no, I'm not sure. What does Elegbata mean? And so I'm really thinking, could this have been that creek and swamp that saved Lagos? And so I start there, and this is why it's on the cover. And in speculating about this, it's gone now, but this these places played really important roles in the city, if not for leisure or for other things. So with my research partners, as we plan our trips, imagine us finding Lake Anelegbata and following that curve and really trying to think, it'd be to sort of come back and dig there and think about this. So these experiences. So what I want to do is end with a few stories. Where does this take us, right? What do we do when now that we have this template, we can interpret the city? What I want to do and what I do in my work is I want to bring in, as I said before, I want to bring in other stories, right? So this would be exciting for you as well, Adike. People who were taken from Lagos, they wanted to come back. Many people remembered. We have evidence of letters. Like take, for instance, this woman who was 30, she's a native of Lagos. So they were trying to come back from Cuba. She's like, I was enslaved. I was sold from the government barracks by somebody else, and I want to come back to Lagos. Another person is talking about, I remember my mother. I remember my family. We were in Lagos. There were 500 of us, 560, who were separated, and we were taken from Lagos. I want to go back. So they were waiting to get passage to Lagos as well. And then we have so many examples of people, even though we don't want to remember history in the city, people remembered Lagos. They remembered their homes, they remember their families, they sent letters. Kristen Mann, who's here, does a lot of work with this. So even though we may have deleted or destroyed a lot of our own history here in the city, people in the 19th century and earlier remembered. And so one of the maps that I drew in the conclusion is, what do we choose to remember and what do we choose to forget? Why is Iloja gone? Well, we have a statue to Madam Tinubu right in the same area. What do we choose to remember? What kinds of histories do we want to write and think about? So all over the city, you will see that there's particular kinds of remembrances. And I'll end with 3 examples. I always say, like, if Breadfruit Street could speak to us, it would tell us these stories of escape, of punishment, of, even someone like Samuel Crowther, acts of violence, but also about rebuilding and converting. We've really lost a lot with our history and our culture. I mean, I'm Catholic, How did my family become Catholic? You know what I mean? I've met people now whose names they sound like maybe Fatunde, and it turns out their name is actually Ifatunde or something like that. People whose names start with Ogun before that. And so this is from Samuel Crowther, where he wrote in his memoirs, I could well recollect many places I knew during my captivity. So when he came back to Lagos, he came over and went over the spots where the slave barracoons used to be. What a difference we see now. Some of the spots are now converted into plantations and sheds built on others. And instead of slaves in chains and in agony and despair, we have a church, right? So this is Crowther's words about Breadfruit Street. And then 2 more examples that I found really painful as somebody who didn't know anything about slavery, but started doing this research. There are 2 men that after the city was bombarded, one is Charles Young. He walked as a missionary and he wanted to go to the house of the man that enslaved him. He's like, I remember. He had been saved in Sierra Leone, and he's like, it struck me that even after these years, he could point to who enslaved him. So this is a small city, right? So imagine people coming back and having to wrestle with this. And one man was fortunate enough to actually be able to confront the chief who enslaved him. So I reproduced a source here. This is the problem with historians' work. We have to kind of try and read this, but this has been preserved. This is a letter written by a missionary called James White in 1853, who would walk in the city. He writes a lot about how he would walk in Ijumota, and he would try to go to people and he's like, bring your Ifa, bring your Orisha, I'll bring my Bible, we'll have a contest in the streets, and I'll show you that my God is better than yours. And so he was trying to convert people. And so part of the stories that he remembers is things like when he walked with this man in Lagos, he says, this man, he recorded that confrontation. This is his version of the confrontation. And the man said on a Sunday afternoon, I'm the man who some years ago was your slave, and then you sold me to the Portuguese, but I was mercifully delivered. And then he talks about how the chief was so shocked. And he's like, little did you think you'd see me again when you ordered me that morning to be sold to the Portuguese? And the story continues that imagine the shock on the chief's face when this man he had thought he had sort of gotten rid of and this man profited from came back. These are the kinds of things that happened in Lagos in the 1850s. And it's incredible we don't know about them. So for somebody like me who writes about, now that I can write about streets, to go back to the sources, I can put these small stories, I can put them in a place. I know where this encounter happened. I know where they had particular interpretations. So if you read the book, you see that the people whose stories are ordinarily fragments, but because I know somebody saw them, or I know where it happened, or I know what it was, I'm able to fill the book with these narratives so that we can actually think about the experiences of people who lived and I say died in Lagos. But of course, one critical thing that I wasn't able to do that I'm working on now, this idea of the history of water, right? Imagine when I first read the book, I thought that I would be able to write a lot about water and its importance. So, for instance, I discovered when I asked people about the history of Five Cowrie Creek, I don't know, does anyone know anything about the history of Five Cowrie Creek? Because I have a question. Yes.
I mean, I heard the reason why it's been five carry creek. It's actually been five carries taken across one side.
And actually never even, I feel like that story gets repeated.
Yeah.
But I does anyone have a different version, maybe? One of the things that I found in doing this work on Five Cowrie Creek is that actually it used to be called, you can correct me, Odo Alam, as in a place where they would take people who were very sick and they would sort of try to treat them with the water. There's a sense that the water had this quality, this healing quality. And in fact, you see that because missionaries are trying to convert people, there's evidence in the later 19th century, the 1870s, 1880s, that missionaries would take people to the water and baptize them. So that there's some kind of significance to that water that's lost. So we call it Five Cowrie Creek, but if you call it by the original name, what do we know about healing? And if you look at the map, that's near where the hospital is, right? So, that's how I figured out what alarm meant, like specifically in that
Which of
case.
course is called Creek Hospital.
Well,
It's Creek
folks,
Hospital.
mysteries, there are mysteries. And so in the newspapers, we
Because
see
it's
that
inside
the
the creek.
missionaries will baptize people specifically right there. So I wonder what the curative or like sort of healing properties are. There's so many mysteries yet to be unraveled here. So, I'm really thinking about water and what that means. So, I have this new project called Troubled Waters, and I'm thinking about that. And I try to highlight the old names of all these things. But I'll stop here. Thank you for listening, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Ademide. I mean, I think I can speak for all of us, and that was fantastic.
Brilliant.
Because I have the mic, I will make my first questions. People online, you know how we do. Please type your questions, and we will go between the in-person and the online. I actually have not so much questions, but sort of like um comments of things that when I was reading sort of gave me goosebumps. So a lot of Lagos has been sanctioned, right? And reclaimed from the 18, from what you just told us. So, but what I didn't realize, and I went on a visit to Bahia in November, and going on a tour there, the tour guide there told me that a lot of Bahia had been sandfilled. And I thought to myself, wow, is that where the returnees learned how to sandfill? Because in your book, where you mentioned that Takwa Oshodi land filled a lot of the land around him, but he had gone to Brazil as an emissary, was an ambassador of, I think Eshiloko had sent him when he was still under, before he went to Kosoko. So that sand, because if you think of sand filling as a methodology, in 1830 something, who was teaching people how to do it? Because if the people here had known how to do it, it would have been done, surely.
Interesting.
So would the British have come, or did the British come and say, oh, okay, people are doing it, or was this a skill that had been learned from Bahia? And I think that one of the things that, and especially in the transatlantic around it, that we have lost so much in the Portuguese and English not really fully communicating together. I also thought it was interesting again because we are so focused now on land transport, how you could take the Ogun River all the way from Ebitometa all the way past Abeokuta. That was a bit of fun ride, and why don't we do it? And why not do it now? Yes, I think it must have been great to do it by water. I'm gonna stop there. I'm gonna ask you to read. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Read your favorite?
Oh man.
Yes.
Should have known this was going to be a thing.
You have to read.
Hmm.
Okay, while you look for yours, let me tell you mine.
Start at the end.
The image of Lagos that emerges from the sources, starting with the rubble and ruins from the December bombardment, is at odds with itself. It is fuzzy, incomplete, and often contradictory. And I think that to me sums up what you've done in the book. And I think it sums up in a way so many of us who love Lagos, but our relationship with it, you can sort of see it clearer at a remove. When you are here, it's fuzzy. But read your
So
favorite
I
part.
found the place, but I'll answer your question first.
Yes.
It's actually, I think that's really interesting. I think when we think about Brazilian Chinese, we often think about them building up, right? We never really think about the sand filling.
Yes.
It's so interesting. There are descriptions of how it was filled. I'm going to have to go back and look at that. And it's funny you brought
I'll be quoted in her book.
And it's funny, when you brought up Oshodi, according to some sources, he's actually the one that developed Olobo.
Yes.
And so after the bombardment happened, he had to leave, and that's why he came back and built. It was given a Kwetedo. But there's evidence that he is actually the one who developed Olobo.
Yeah.
So I actually never thought about this. You see, now you bring this up. Now that it's done. But no, I mean, Lagos is a riddle. It's just layers and layers. And so we do have evidence of that. And now you're bringing this idea in my mind that, we have to maybe rethink what we think about Portuguese or Brazilian architecture. It's not just fancy buildings.
It's maybe the foundation.
Maybe
It's the foundation.
Of sense there that this has been brought in that way.
Because and why I sort of kind of know this is because the part that was given to them as the Brazilian quarters was swamp.
Exactly. It was
but
all
they
swamp.
knew how to landfill
That
it.
is so fascinating.
Okay. I mean, about that they were set up to fail. But it was until I went to Brazil and the lady said it, I thought, oh gosh, that's where they learned.
That totally makes sense because when you look at the sources, people who were viewed as outsiders were often not given land in the center of the city. And in fact, when you look at where Brazilians, Cubans, and some Sierra Leoneans were, they had to fill these swamps. They had to do all of this. I just hadn't thought about the actual technology of it. So more work to be done. That's it.
Okay.
So I found a paragraph. I don't know if it's my favorite, but this one is easy to read. Do you still want me to?
Yes. Do you want her to read? There you go.
It's so strange. I finished this book so long ago. I was like, who wrote this? But anyway, this is near the end where I'm thinking about forgetting Lagos, right? At the end, the final chapter is called Eko Niroti, in terms of we are constantly trying to forget our history. Everything is things that are just constantly being destroyed. I even heard through Loving Lagos that heritage sites are still under threat. Yeah. In our walking experience this morning, people were shocked by the beauty of things that have been. I'm not reading it. I'm just saying people were shocked by the beauty of what's been gone. So our history's erasure is deliberate. So I'll just end with this paragraph. I guess perhaps the only constant in the tumultuous history of Lagos has been the sense of ambiguity that's haunted the indigents, the residents, and visitors alike. Sorry. There is a similarity in their letters, their newspaper articles, and drawings about Lagos, even as far back as the 19th century. As challenging as it is to stay in Lagos, it often felt impossible to leave. Being away from the city provoked a curious nostalgia tinged with fear and regret, and the pull of Lagos is always there. This historical feeling is what is referenced by Wale Soyinka, in the epigraph for this chapter, where he identifies the pull of the city's energy, but also the elements that push so many out. So in the book, exactly, so he wrote an article called Unsinkable City. So I end by saying that by arguing about historical encounters in space, this book frames the city's past as one that's open to possibilities rather than bound to the inevitabilities of power and place. However, the historical record, we have to remember that it often flattens the complexity of this feeling. Lagos is often only one thing, a city that is leavable but not livable. Imagine Lagos, this book, attempts to return some of this ambivalence to the city's historical record. End of story.
Okay, so I'm going to go online first because they were fastest fingers.
All right.
And so we have, you can see the comments from Kristen Mann. So and I'm going to throw it open to everyone here.
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you, Ademide, for your rich presentation. Thanks to me. Christine has a specific question. Can either or both of you, or in fact anybody here, explain the meaning of the name Shetoli, my ancestor? And I'm sorry, we too also don't know what it means. No one has been able to explain it to me.
Shetoli. I don't know. Maybe somebody who's better might know.
No, nobody has been able. But we will go back and we will research.
We have to ask,
okay?
maybe we have to ask outside Lagos. Maybe. Oh, wait,
Yes.
maybe we have it
Okay,
here.
yeah. It's a yeah, because so that people online can actually hear you.
Okay, thank you.
Come down so that you can see the mic.
There.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so I'm just curious. We have a place in Lagos Island, and the plan is to answer some of these questions. And the idea is, when I say Lagos, I mean something. And the idea is to bring this old men, old women, to come and give an account of their time just before they pass on. And it would be interesting to find or to hear them answer some of these from the issues that you raised about the naming of the streets. And even if it's not accurate, but it's important to get their own opinion. And by the time you collate all this, I'm sure we'll be able to come up with some.
But to add to this, Ademide Adelusi-Adeluyi, who was a sort of historian in the early 20th century, just like Payne, he write all this information. So he actually published explanation that he thought of what all the street names meant. Unfortunately, that book has disappeared, and we have maybe 6 or 7 pages. And the Kristen Mann, who's in the audience, she just happened to photocopy it around 1985, and she took some notes. That's the only record we have. So I have a clear idea of maybe about 50 meanings, according to him. This is how I know that Victoria Road / Gambia Zikiwe, they would throw away babies there. He's the one that recorded this epic story about the streets. I'm all over. So thanks to Kristen, we have this, but it's only, if anyone knows about this book, it's called Notes on Lagos Streets. It's about 110 years old, but I've not been able to locate a record. We only have those 7 or 8 pages that Kristen happened to photocopy. And so,
look in your daddy's.
Exactly.
Libraries.
Kristen, knowing her kind of research works,
yes.
If she has some opinion already, it's just trying to see.
Hey, Kristen, you've been asked that, do you have an idea of what the name might mean? I'm going to unmute you. Hang on. Can I unmute her? Yeah. Okay, no, you need to unmute yourself.
I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Please, I need a round of applause. You're speaking to Kristen Mann. I mean, come on.
Well, no, I applaud you all. My applause to you. I'm so grateful for this session, and so impressed, Ademide, with your rich and wonderful work, and so glad to have everybody here in the audience. I'm looking up and suddenly seeing my battery's low, so I will be quick. I have asked many people about what the name means, and it across time is spelled differently in the sources that I have seen referring to your ancestor. And of course, the spelling could affect the etymology of the name, the words that were put together to make the name. The one I've seen several places that Olu refers to a person of high status. And in Owu, where Shetelu was born, that Olu at the end of a name suggested high status. He was training as a babalawo, and he was a babalawo, so his family might have been of high status. So I'm working on it, but I don't have a clear, simple answer.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
a comment here. A number of families use Shetolu as a family name. Shetolu Pereira, Shetolu Peters, Shetolu Thomas all have Abeokuta stroke Owu as their enslaved location. So perhaps it's a name that comes from a particular location. Yes. Okay, so while I wait for more questions online, okay, there's a confirmation. So apart that Darosha knew how to landfill from Bahia, his enslaver rented him out from plantation to plantation. That was how he paid for his manumission. And this is from a Darosha descendant, so she should know.
All right.
Okay.
We're on to something.
So questions from the house? Anybody? Yes, please. Could you come forward so the people online can hear you? Or if it's short, then
very short.
David will paraphrase for you.
Firstly, I think it's a great idea to document countless stories as possible. Missions wise, that was part of the research was not when you mentioned, debates in the streets, but having a structure to be great. One of the memories that my father gave me about his life in Lagos Island was that at one point in time he used to walk to where Echo Hotel is, and there was a creek, and his son, very grand, would just basically get mussels, plants from the side, and cook full soups. It was just when you read it on your map, you actually saw like a what's one of your crews in that area.
Yeah. So definitely, I think, well, maybe if I pull up, I can pull that up super quick. But it's so interesting to me that Lagos was actually a site for not just mussels, but also oysters. There used to be oysters all over. We were well known for our fresh oysters in that sense. So I'll pull this up because I think it'll be easier to just show you rather than just say it. But yeah, so people tell these stories, but people find it hard to believe because they're like, what are you talking about? There's a creek in Victoria Island. So it's probably Igoshere Creek.
Kurama Waters.
No, this one here. Igoshere Creek, right there. And it goes all the way down and empties over here near where. So it's entirely, so there's only a little bit of the shallow water left. But not a lot of work has been done on the history of Victoria Island and how it was used. So I would suspect that this creek also in some of and you see Maracay is right up there as well. And so I would suspect that if we did more research, and I mean, I didn't really look at maps of Victoria Island because it wasn't really the place I was interested in, but they exist. And I would imagine that if we did more of this work, these stories that people tell, we'll be able to substantiate them because we have these maps. I said something similar about Idumago as well. These were real things up until the 1940s, 1950s. I think people forget how recent Victoria Island is, how recently Ikoyi and Victoria Island have been settled. So these are, I think, even places I don't think you can dig up Victoria Island, but I don't think that's going to work. But yeah, so definitely this is why I think these maps are important. And you will find that sometimes people will write what they can find, if it's mussels or it's oysters or it's different. There was a whole economy around the water. And that's what the sand filling often would kill, because there's actually a really interesting episode that I found recently. There used to be a shrine right over here. And when they were building the bridge, when they were building this bridge, I don't know if you can see it, Carter Bridge originally, they displaced a shrine. I think it's called Otaomi, the shrine that was there. And they had to displace that. So actually people moved the shrine. They were recorded moving the shrine and they put it at a different base of the bridge. And then something happened one day and there was a fire on the lagoon around I forget the date exactly, maybe it was 1921. There was a fire on the lagoon that nobody could quench. And people were like, fire on the water, what is happening? And so some of the local priests were saying that this is the return, the shrine, the sort of sort of version of coming back, and underneath we'll see the oysters. And so we see all of this information, and then the British, some chemists that work for the administration is like, no, I will reproduce this phenomenon. You people are too superstitious. But people were like, no, this is a sign from our Orisha that the fires on the lagoon, the water can't quench the flame. And so you see all of these things related to oysters, fish, mussels, but a lot of this is gone now because as we're building all this new infrastructure, so much was displaced in that sense. And when you think about people who had to move to Surulere or Yaba, all these ideas around crowding and the reclamation, in the city. There's so much that we've lost in this sense. But because it's quite challenging to do this kind of work, a lot of people focus on the 20th century. But by that time, we've already lost so much. And even these stories seem like they're made up. But in many times, people are telling you what actually happened. We just don't always have the evidence. So thank you for bringing up the muscles. I always forget about that.
Yes.
Okay, so I have more questions. Well, as you know, what you do here is tourism, but then the work you do, it begins to raise a lot of questions and you use maps. And I think we have, in my own view, exhausted our sources for the history as we know. In fact, a lot of the things that we believe are being contested now, we should say. Now, the question that we're asked here is like, what's all this relevance of this system? How does it affect the future? Because the whole thing is you must know your past to know where you're going. So, and that's the question we usually get from our customers here. Okay, so yes, you told us the history, what's the future? This is all I cited. But really, it's an interesting topic. We've seen ideas of what Lagos would look like in the future. But what helps us, what methodology can we use to say, okay, this is the path to take? And I think the conversation could start from it because this is now serious work that you've done here. Some other people, and I saw your interview with Mr. Chukwushachoro, have suggested archaeology, paleontology, and all of that, go away from all the stories that have been told or the folklores to now start to research because we can only guarantee the history to a certain time. So how would you say we proceed? And this is just your thoughts. How do you say we proceed from where you are and what we're sure to the past and how we investigate that, like you said, and then how it also plays into the future?
Well, it's kind of a lot of tough questions, but what I would say is actually, I think we haven't exhausted the sources that we have yet. We've exhausted the ones we know about, right? If it's History of Lagos by Lucy, or if it's Peace by Buckley Woods that everyone. And I was actually really shocked to find out this week that those are cultural sort of touchstones in Lagos. One of the difficulties of this is a lot of our history is locked away somewhere else. If you spend a week at the British Library, you'll be astonished by what you find, the kinds of letters, the kind of material. If you spend time at the CMS archive, I didn't have time to do this because of the pandemic, but James White walked in Lagos for months, and he's one of many missionaries. And as I showed you in the text, there's a lot, the handwriting can be hard to read. These missionaries, they were in Abeokuta, they were in Badagry, they were all over the place. But it's really hard to engage with these sources. And it depends on people like myself and people who other people pay, right? This is why research and funding is so important. We need to fund somebody who can spend the time to do this kind of work. So for me, there's so many sources I haven't even transcribed yet. I am sitting on so much stuff as well. So I don't think many of us who do this professionally will say that we've exhausted our sources. In fact, we're at the tip of the iceberg, I think, because if we only even just take one missionary, James White, I know somebody who worked with James White because of the masquerades. But if we were to sit and transcribe everything he wrote in Badagry, in Abeokuta, if we were to sit and read the Church Missionary Gleaner, these magazines and these newspapers they had, it's just incredible. But my book can only be so big. So I selected what I found most interesting. But if we create a sustained, funded process where young people and others can really engage with these sources, even as antagonistic as some of them are, there's so much we can still do. I just feel like, but you need the time, the money, and the training. And this is why certain things keep getting repeated, because only certain kinds of projects will be funded. I know very few female Lagosian historians like myself. There's me, there's Abosede George, and there's Halimat Shobosom, who is writing a history of Lagos as well. These are the people that I know. We need more people like this. And even I came to this late. Like what you're saying about history, I think we don't understand just how ruthless we are until we leave the country. Everyone is doing Japa. But when you get there, you realize you're not European. You're not like them. They're not going to accept you. You have to figure out, it seems like a surprise. I'm so fancy, but no, you're not one of them. And then they're like, who are you? And you're like, oh, it's a great question. You know what I mean? And so I think it impacts people till today. I mean, people in my generation who grew up in Lagos didn't really speak Yoruba. I mean, I understand Yoruba, but this cultural loss is intense and it's frightening. And you add that to a lack of historical knowledge. And people like myself teach in America. So I'm teaching American kids and they know a lot more about this than imagine if I could do this kind of work in Nigeria. But that kind of stuff
Imagine, yes.
exactly, it needs funding, it needs sustained things. But as you know, with the new administration in America, they don't want to fund these kinds of things. They're not interested in these kinds of questions. So if we want to really do this work and think about the sources, we're going to have to invest in it. And so, talking to older people is going to take time and money. I always encourage people to talk to their families before it's over. I encourage people, look up, where do you live? Where do you work? What is this place you're at? What is the meaning of it? Even Ikeja, like what is the meaning of Ikeja? I found out recently it might be an acronym.
Yeah, it is. It is
what I
for
mean?
a government thing.
Yes. So the point I'm making is that if we want more of this, right? So for instance, I'm not done listing all the names. We need funding, we need support, we need to show people that scholarship is not just a waste. Like this is something you can do. And so, funding, I would say investment.
Ekpe joint administration.
Oh, good one. Thank you. And so, these are
Yes.
basic questions. And so if you're in America and you apply to the Mellon Foundation, they fund what they think of and what is interesting to them. So I'm sure if somebody said, okay, I will fund 3 PhD students in Lagos, let's start this work. You'll be shocked the kind of stuff that we'll find out about ourselves. I guess that's my rant about about research. But the scholars need support, and I wasn't sure I was going to say. I didn't know I'd say this today, but here we go.
So I have one comment, and then I'm going to ask for the last question because we are almost at the end. Something that came out to me from the book, and I thought I hadn't sort of really thought about it before, was how you say that Abeokuta, Badagry, Porto Novo, Ekpe, and Vida are all on a trajectory with Lagos as the focal point. And I think that's something that we don't really think about now. How do you think that shift happened?
So it's really fascinating that this is why geography is important. One of the reasons why people would settle in Lagos and why the city is important is because we are at a really important nexus. Lagos is at the center. It's a kind of natural break in the Atlantic coastline. So that's why, slave ships could come in here. So not only are we on the Atlantic, there's also a lagoon system that goes east and west across, parallel to the lagoon, to Wida, to Badagry, also to the other direction. This product used to be called a lagoon city. That's what I thought it was going to be. And I thought I'd really spend more time looking at water. And then this waterways go north as well. So with the place at that kind of intersection, people feel safe here. People feel they have opportunities here. People can sell here. People can come from markets all over. So it's not always just like this sort of almost predetermined that whatever happened in this space would be important. And we know with the port facilities that were developed, all of these things. So it's a kind of geographical element.
And the natural harbor.
And the natural harbor that had to be deepened when the British came.
Yes.
But, this is a really special intersection. This is why there's always been so much opportunity. And that goes back to the question about the water. There's a reason why, because then they could sort of defend on all sides and you could feel safe here. And then there's a sort of distance from the mainland as well, where you could sort of be cocooned here. So, when we write only from the 20th century, we forget a lot of this because of the way that Lagos has been changed over time. So I think we should even go further back. Like this period I think it's really interesting, but there's so much work even before. Like there are all these, to go back to Kosoko. Kosoko is seen in Badagry all the time in the 1840s, but I couldn't write about that in this book. He's seen all the time. People talk all the time. There are all these rumors that people document all the time in Badagry, in Ikorodu, in Ekpe. All of that is there. You know what I mean? But unless somebody has the interest, it's not really going to come out in that book.
Any last questions? Yes. Okay.
Just a comment.
Please, can we ask you to come out so that I'm sorry. Okay. Otherwise, you won't be get you online.
Oh, sure. Project.
Okay, project. Okay.
Just really just commend you in the work. It was so fascinating. Just hearing about the process and how you went about it, and just to re-emphasize the importance of this kind of work. I mean, I'm shocked people are asking why we need to know about our history. I just don't understand. Because if we don't know who we are, how do you know where we're going? I think a lot of us, I'm from my husband was from Lagos, International House in Bangladesh, So Lagos is really the multiple layers you want to describe. I think there's still much more that needs to be done. But I just want to just make a case that we need more of this.
Yes.
More of it. And I'm wondering how we can amplify what we're doing. There's a few of us here, and it's not enough. So how do we kind of amplify the work, let people know what we're doing? So I think you really need to kind of let people know that this is going on. And because like you say, go the world to people, you're not this is what Nigeria. No, this is it. So it's very important that we find out what we do this kind of exercise. So it'd be good to just know how we can make it kind of a bigger platform.
Oh, wow. Okay, that would be so.
But that and
So,
yes,
thank you so much for your comments and that question. I mean, more questions. This is basically why I'm here. You know what I mean? Look, I was in California before, so you can imagine teaching Africa to kids in California. They're like, "What's a Ghana?" You know what? You know, it's not really. This
What's
is
a Ghana?
Well, it's like I got something in Ghana. They're like, "What's that?" So this is the kind of thing I'm engaging with, and so but now that I'm in DC. I'm teaching Howard students who are really just so brilliant and they're really engaged and they want to learn. Some of my students are in Ghana right now. I was like, nah, I'm going to Lagos because this is where I'm going to spend my spring break. So part of what, and I'm so glad you asked this because like I said, I wrote this for people like myself, people like my family, others. Academic work is so sequestered, you're just sort of behind all these footnotes and this text. I'm really thinking about even trying to make a more accessible version. People ask me about multimedia all the time. It's not going to read this book. It's quite expensive for the Lagos market. And so a lot of what I've been doing is talking to people like, what can I do to make, because this doesn't belong to me. I just happen to be the one that's doing it. And so I'm totally open to ways that people might think that this kind of work can be made accessible. Some people have told me, oh, I need a version for secondary school. And I was like, that's interesting. I just never thought of that before. Like, that's not, for academics, sometimes they have this sort of ivory tower that the more complex and obscure it is, the better you're doing. But we're writing ourselves into irrelevancy. But for me, because I'm Lagosian and this was a path of discovery for me, I want other people to have access to it. So I'm very easy to find, ademide@gmail.com. If you talk today, I'm very, very open. I'm sitting on far much more than what I put in here. And I want to make this accessible. You know what I mean? It's just how.
Yeah, I do think that. I mean, there's simple things you can do. I always think that I've always said it's all to do with this tool on students. And just having it as a regular thing.
Yeah, so we did one this morning.
It's not did this morning, but every Saturday you should just be different tools. And you get a lot of history on that.
Absolutely.
And you've done the work, so
yeah, I'm totally. We should talk about this.
Yes.
I am totally open. I leave tomorrow, but I will be back in June.
Okay.
So we're working on. Huh?
Are you doing tours in June?
So for our conference, we do a number of things, but we usually start at 7 a.m.
And it is not hot.
Yeah.
Yes. So like I said, I'm happy to follow up.
The gentleman in the green.
Yes, hi.
And before I continue, of course, Loving Lagos also does tours as well. We are in a tour place.
Yes, exactly. We're all in collaboration.
Yes.
Okay, so those make a comment on name Central Blue. So the name I mean, will be
Okay, I think you need to come front because but we need to record this. It's a project. We need to record this because it's important. Yes, and Kristen is online.
so there's a Yoruba dictionary. It's called Yoruba name. I mean, for all names that came out, but we want to go to the dictionary. It's founded by Kola Boston.
Of course.
Yeah, so just put in the name, then see the origin, all the details. So talking of Shetelu, ordinarily originates from Ondo State, share or tell. Like to conquer, share or tell. I mean, how do we call or tell now? Enemies, right? Yeah, exactly. So be it the frigates or the surface. I mean, so I think the name originally originated from Ondo State. So this person can just probably do some research and go back to probably Ondo State and then voila.
Okay. Maybe it means warrior.
Yes, totally, exactly.
Because
His name is a warrior, which is what I know that my ancestor was, and Kristen has confirmed. Okay, it was your turn.
No, and she said she worked in June and started.
Okay. Okay,
Yes,
so
there are a number of really exciting tours of Lagos, right? And they all do different kinds of things, whether it's about architecture or like, the Brazilian courses are different things. So one of the things I'm really interested in is this sort of earlier Yoruba heritage, wearing breadfruit streets, forgive me for if I say it wrong, Shokono, thank you. Somebody always corrects me. There's a Shokono street. And in fact, there's a street to his chief, who is described as his chief priestess. Her name is Chijuiku. And that's right there next to Shokono Street. And so these things are sitting there, and we need to be able to go into these areas, but we also have to navigate the sort of context. People are really struggling in some of the most excitingly named places. People are really struggling. We always have to kind of balance and navigate. So all of these stories, when you look at their records, and I'm trying to put some of this online as well, there's just really incredible stories. I only picked 30. There's probably about 120. There's, like I said, there's a limit. This book was supposed to be out 2 years ago. And there's a limit to what, we can do in this sense. But there's still so much more. I spent a lot of time trying to just catalog these street names and talking to people and working with them. I put my parents to work. Please do the tone marks and the diacritics and all that kind of stuff. But exactly. So, but yes, we're still also working through the logistics of how to do it. So this morning, we kind of started in Onikan, and then we went to TBS. Sometimes we did a variety of things, and then we walked around, and we went to, breadfruit streets and here and there. We're making our way inwards, and the part of why we start at 7 is to make this possible. But yeah, so by all means, so people asked online how to contact me. I'm very easy to find. So ademide@gmail.com. Oh, yes, exactly. Young people have told me I have to do Instagram. So I have ademide.aa. I'm still catching up on posting things from November when I was here last time.
Yeah.
Kind of a struggle. I probably have to just hire a young person to sort of do this stuff. I also have an Instagram called Old Lagos, where I'm trying to make this stuff because I see a lot of people do interesting work putting pictures of it. We need context. What is this thing, right? I have I work with a photographer. We've collected all of these street signs. I think it'd be incredible to do a sort of an exhibition. I think that's so beautiful. There are people's how we've gone through a lot of troubles. Even so you told me about Chateau.
Yes, I did.
Yes. I went looking for hairy turns, I have to say. There were some moments I have to say.
Yes.
Yeah. But
how was it surprised? Because we still started ages ago. So to see it now was really touching.
I was hoping you'd like that.
Yes.
So there's a lot we can do. I even had this idea we would do Lagos families, that we could do all kinds of incredible things. Exactly. My mom is from Badagry with roots in the Saleh Coast. So, with this migrationary patterns are really incredible. So, I love that I work with the students here in Lagos sometimes as well, but that people are interested, we don't have access. I've been in the archive in Ibadan, and I don't want to upset anybody or anybody who runs the archive by saying this, but I've been there and I hold something in my hands that will crumble. And I'm like, this is our history disappearing. In Kew Gardens, to touch something, I have to be trained. Right? I need gloves. Sometimes when I look at photographs, they have somebody watching me, she's not going to destroy our stuff. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But, we need to also think carefully. Sometimes I'm doing research in Nigeria, I pick things up off the floor. So we need to also keep, document, invest, talk to people, think about our history, because we're losing a lot. I look at my nieces and nephews, and it's almost like, they're just in America, they're in England, whatever. It's just what it is. And being Nigerian is like jollof rice or something.
Yes, and
it's quite dire. It is actually quite dire. So I think people who tell me that I need to engage with young people are right. We need to find a way to get them stop feeling so dislocated. I know how it felt for me. You know what I mean? And I'm talking about 20 years ago. So the people now, it's like they're even losing the Yoruba. At least I understand Yoruba. You know what I mean? They're losing so much constantly. I
have one last comment on the book, and it's the picture you have on page 5. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which is colonial Lagos from the roof of the courthouse.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it's the courthouse in Tinubu Square.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not the courthouse behind, yes, that's yes, exactly. So I looked at it because you have the description underneath, and I think, oh, I wonder. Zoom on, you can see Ilojoba.
I've always wondered about that.
Yes. Yes, and it is because that was when the court was.
Yes,
Because
absolutely.
because the Supreme Court was on in Tinubu Square, where the fountain is. Yes, yes.
It's so interesting.
So that is where photograph was taken. And when you look at it,
panorama, it's quite huge. It's just so tiny in the book.
yes, no, because I took a photograph of it. That's how, and then I expanded on my phone. But when you look through it, you can now see Ilojoba and all the rest of the Brazilian quarters behind it. So that was my last comment. 6 minutes. Thank you very much. I think she deserves a round of applause.
Oh, so
Okay, so
this is so interesting. I have two.
test fingers.
I have two copies here, and so well, I guess there's no way to say this. It kind of sold out before I came. Saying that
That is correct.
at Bada, and so yeah, loving ladies were interested in stopping the book, but because when I was studying, I wasn't able to get more than a handful of copies, and then we did a walk. So people buy the book. I have two for sale here. One is sort of
On your marks, get set.
here. Folayami has.
You're behind. You're behind. I've only had the nod, so the one is gone.
So yes, but then Folayami, who is at Bada, I know that he has 4 or 5 left at 27 Royal Street. But like I said, I'll be back in June, and if I know that there's a demand for it here, I would definitely. Basically, what I did is I put them. They wanted to. Publisher wanted to ship them, but I basically put them in my suitcase. And in November, I brought more. Actually, when I came in November, remember when we met,
Yes,
I had a ton more. But people were interested, and they're gone now. So one copy here, if anyone is interested.
It's already gone.
It's gone, and then
no, it's already gone. It's actually already gone.
It's totally. I mean, if you have access to Amazon, it's so interesting. It is on Amazon. It's just that academic books, they probably print a few hundred copies, and they have this new replenishment model. So I just had we just had a big African Studies conference, and a bunch of people bought a bunch then. So when I was coming in, there were less than 19 left. And now I'm already down to that. But like I said, I will be back, inshallah, by God's grace.
And do a plug for the Lagos Studies.
Yeah, so Lagos Studies Association. If you go online, you see lagosstudiesassociation.com or .org. I always forget. And we discuss a lot of books and we do a lot of things. And we're always trying to get more people involved and trying to make ourselves sort of more accessible. We're already here in Nigeria. It felt so crazy in the beginning because the first conference was in New York, but now we're in Nigeria. So when I do
come back, the 8th one.
Yes, I always forget all these. I'm quite tired. I'm sorry. I was in the sun all day.
I've been talking. You've been talking.
It's been since 6:45 this morning.
It's like one. Please come. It's at Unilag. It's on for 3 days.
It's June, the middle of June. Yeah. I will make an announcement through Loving Lagos, and we're trying to also connect with you, sir. Thank you. But I'll be back with more, and if I find a way to send more, I will. It's the list price is $35. I'm just trying to, like I said, make a version that's not. You'll see when you read this. I mean, I don't know how you found it. Do you find it sort of?
It's accessible.
It's accessible.
No, but I must say that it is accessible reading.
I want to make frightening reading that's even better, maybe one with more maps that's glossier, so we can read these together, because I think this should be in people's hands. And so hopefully maybe in June I can bring more of the book, because it's hard to ship them here. The publisher was there are some people like Jazz Hole and here and Bada who will stock. I saw Kone yesterday or 2 days ago, but someday, and it's getting it here is the issue. And so, but like I said, I'm working on bringing more and making this more accessible so that it doesn't have to be 50,000 naira. That sounds like a lot in a way, I think, to me. So I'm working on a variety of things. I just have to reprioritize what I do. Yes.
So that was great. Completely bowled over. Thank you, ladies. This is online. And thank you to everybody online. Bye, people. Thank you for staying.
thank you everyone so much. Thank you to Lovely Lagos and thank you.
Thank you. And we now have
Yes.
Lovely Lagos to come and give his thank you, our host.
Yeah.
A bit of applause, a clap.
Thank you very much for coming. It's been a long time that we've done this. And this is exactly what we want to do. Obviously, our desire is to showcase, to promote Lagos. I believe you did say you're Catholic.
Yes.
I just heard her say, Inshallah. So, that's the kind of the question. You say I'm thankful for that. Imra, always I have sending money to my aunties to go to church to check some pictures because they were good festival.
Yeah.
Certainly, we have a lot of VIPs in the room. Johan, thank you very much. And I'd like to recognize Wendy,
Yes,
for his efforts to meet here today because it's the holidays from Global Family that can make this happen. And I hope it's started that and done it. And then obviously we want to do more.
And I have your street sign.
I've been a bit nervous because I thought there was going to be a lot of British bashing because they have the deputy commissioner. But I'm sure he's used to it. Thank you again. It shows your passion and your love for Lagos.
Yeah.
So thank you everybody and I hope you all have a
no, it's the other way.
Start the discussion. Yeah.
Exactly. Okay. So thank you very much.
So I brought 2 copies for someone who I think is not here.
Okay, so I have one. I have 2 people on it.
Oh, is that Chloe? Is he there? Oh, 2 others. Oh, sorry.